For those who went to Mass yesterday, the first reading, we had God who was talking to Nathan, who then was to tell David to build a house. And there are really two kind of meanings when you build a house and when you talk about that, because the house of David, right, it means the family of David. We talk about the house of David, and that Jesus came from the house of David, from the lineage of David. That's kind of the tribe or the family thing. Ever since God took the people from the Israelites out of Egypt, during that time, they were living in tents. They were in tents because they were going through the desert, right? So they got a tent. And that word actually, tabernacle, means to tent with someone. So there was no, in Jerusalem, there was no temple at all. What they had was something that looked like the same format of the temple, but it was all made in tents, and it was the idea that they could get out and move if they needed to. They'd move the whole tent, reset it back up, put the Ark of the Covenant, and be there. But now, with David, what we see God doing is making a permanent place called, in Israel, if you go to Jerusalem, you see that there's the temple, the destruction of the temple. It's actually built something. And so when you talk about a house for God, they're talking about something that you actually built, right? And then that became the place where God dwelled. And that temple's been around for many, 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 many years now. All right? But then there's the lineage of David and the house of David. So what we have going on in that first reading, both yesterday and today, is really how God is beginning to create a people that he wants for his own, right? That they would be his God, and God would be their God, and they would be his people. I gotta get that down right. They would be his people. God, you're my God, and we would be your people. That's what it is, right? And today, what we have is David kind of responding to that offer in prayer. So David even says he's in prayer, and he's talking to God, and he's realizing that he's going to become, the whole place is going to become God's people, and God would become their God, right? That's the next big step. Because you know that then the Father, then creates a people that now we belong to. We belong to the house of David, right? Because we come to the Judeo-Christian religion, right? So God has picked us as his own. We belong to the family of God, Jesus, because of Christ, right? Because we're all the adopted sons and daughters of God. And we believe then as children of God. Now, he says in there that he will never abandon us then. He says, never withdraw his favor from his people. Even though, he says, if they stray, right, or they do some bad things, he says, I will correct them, but I will never withdraw myself from them. And that's often what happens. Parents understand that, right? A lot of times with their children, the children do some things they're not supposed to do, but you don't lose my favor, but I got to correct this for your own benefit. Well, God does that same thing with us too. So the house of David, the house of Jesus coming from the house of David, and us coming from there. So for us, it's a reminder too, that even as we stray as a church, we do some crazy things, right, and some bad things, that God has not lost his favor with us. He promised that he would stay with us. Even, he says, if I have to do a little correction, a little, sort of put you back on course again. But it doesn't mean that God would leave us. And I think what we try to say is that it's proof for us that the church is really of God. Because most of us as lay people, as people in the church over the centuries, have done everything we can to destroy the church, right? Through our own sins and everything, and yet it still endures. And then we also have many powerful people who have tried to destroy the church. And 2,000 years later, it still is here. And it's amazing. That shows kind of what we believe, that God's prophecy was being fulfilled. That he would never leave us. Even if sometimes we leave God, even if we stray, even if we as a church. And that's why it's important to stay in the church, because of this promise, that God will always be here. You may have some priests doing some bad things, you may have some bishops doing some bad things, you may have some lay people doing some bad things, but nonetheless, God said he would dwell here with us. And it'll get corrected, but to never leave that fact that we will always be God's people and God will always be our God.